Breathe. 1, 2, 3. And start. Hello, Cassandra Clare. Welcome to Spain. Thank you for being in this interview. How are you? Are you enjoying your stay here in Spain?
I'm very much enjoying my time in Spain. I haven't been here to see my Spanish readers in almost 15 years. It's so long, and I'm so happy to be back. It's very hot, and it's funny.
I know.
They were first words that I learned when I landed in Madrid. People kept coming up to me, mucho calor, mucho calor.
Yeah, it's beautiful, but also it's
mucho
very
calor.
hot. Very hot
It's
in
very
here,
beautiful.
Yeah. I want to ask you some questions about your writing craft, and I think that everyone that's watching this video, they probably know about you, but maybe just in case, could you tell us about your origin story? How did you become a writer and then an author?
I think I wanted to be a writer since I was a very little kid. I remember when I was 12, my father got me my first computer. It's a Mac Classic, which most of you have never even seen. Looks like a big box. And as soon as I got the computer, I was typing all these stories. I wrote a vampire book, and I wrote a fantasy book, and an Arthurian book, and a mystery novel. They were all very bad, but I was so excited to be writing. And then, I sort of got in my 20s, I got discouraged about the idea of being a writer. I thought, oh, it seems like it's so hard. It's so hard to succeed. It's so hard to get published. And then I became a journalist, and I, spent a lot of time writing nonfiction. And then, but I wasn't happy. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And while I was at work, I would work on City of Bones, because I had gotten the idea for City of Bones when I moved to New York. And so when no one was looking at me at work, and I worked the night shift too, so I was work from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. No one was there, so I would just sit there and work on City of Bones. And so when it was done, I sent it to an agent, and then it got published, and that's the rest of that is history. But I'm just really glad that I took the chance on writing it.
Yeah, that you actually did it.
Yeah.
And do you have some interesting story, for example, from someone that said, oh, this book is not going to work, don't even try it, or something like that, and now you're like, yeah, karma.
I mean, I remember that so two funny stories. One is just that the person who worked with me at I can't tell you who it is, but they worked with me at the magazine that I worked at in New York. It was a tabloid magazine. We were reporting on celebrities and gossip and all that. And he kept saying, don't write a book, write a screenplay. Screenplays where the money's at. Don't write a book. Nobody reads books. And I ignored him. And then, of course, when the book went out to people, to different publishers, some of them wanted it, and some of them, I got a letter from, I think it was HarperCollins, and they said, oh, nobody wants to read fantasy. Nobody wants to read this kind of book. So many years later, I was at a party, and there was an editor from HarperCollins there, and she said, I love your books. They're so great. Why didn't you submit them to us? And I said, I did, and you rejected them.
Whoa.
That's great. It was a very nice moment.
I think that people that are starting writing, we're sometimes afraid of rejection and judgment, but it's something that has happened to many people.
So many people, everybody.
They were obviously wrong, so that's the story. So people can say, that's okay. If people say to you, what are you doing writing your silly fantasy books? Well, maybe one day I'll be like Cassandra Clare, so shut up, please. You are in Spain because you are talking about your new adult book, that's Swordcatcher, El Guardián de las Espadas in Spanish. So now you've written for middle grade readers, young adult, and now also for adult audience. How was this process for you as a writer? It was difficult? Did you notice there were changes in your process, or it was natural? It's just the act of writing a book.
I think it was very different for me, and I think it was because I've spent so much time working on Cazadores de Sombras and inside the head of teenagers, people who are 16, 17, 18 years old, and they're in a very specific time of life. When I'm writing about love, it's first love. When I'm writing about losing someone, it's usually the first time that they've lost someone, or the first time they've experienced real grief, or the first time that they've been disappointed in adults. And so when I moved into writing Swordcatcher, what struck me was these characters, big difference is this is not the first time for them. It's not the first time they've been in love. It's not the first time that they've lost somebody. It's not the first time that they've been disappointed in adults. They are adults. They're disappointed in adults all the time.
Maybe themselves.
Maybe, and they're also themselves, their friends. And so it's just a very different outlook. And so for me, it was resituating myself in this new outlook that was really the big challenge. I've been through both stages of life, so, I can kind of look back and say, okay, this is what it was like, but kind of to take my writing style and move it, that was really interesting.
And also, did you have to do more, like, background for every character, I assume? Like, they have more story.
That's true. Yeah, every character has more background because they've lived longer, they've had more complicated background lives. And just not having written those kind of reactions before, it was new. It was challenging.
Yeah, and would you say that there's something that you've learned as yourself, as a writer writing Swordcatcher, that you didn't notice and that it was different from writing the Shadowhunters books?
I mean, I definitely, when I started, I wasn't sure how it would be for me to create a new world completely from scratch, because it was something I'd never done before. And I love high fantasy, I love Lord of the Rings, I love, Robin Hobb's books, I love books like that, where you have, Game of Thrones, where you're in a constructed world, but it feels really real. So, but that doesn't mean just because it's something you love to read that you are confident you can do it yourself. And so the process of doing the research and building the world, making it seem realistic, every step of the way, I think I was like, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? And so, having finished that first book, I felt very proud.
Yeah, and now with the second book of the series, that's also an adult book, of course, are you feeling the same, or do you feel more confident, like, I've already done this, let's do this, or there's like these little voice every writer has, like, maybe you can do this, blah, blah.
I think you always have the little voice, because then the little voice says, but maybe, you did one book, or maybe the second book won't be as good, or something like that. But it's definitely not, it's not as it took me 3 years to write the first book and 1 year to write the second book. So I think you can see the difference, because all of the research was there, and then I knew the characters. I think it's, always for me, the first book is the hardest, because I'm getting to know the people, and how they're going to react in different situations, and all the ins and outs of their personality. And that's true for every book.
It's like you know them, so you know exactly where they're going to do.
Right, now I know completely. First book I didn't, when I first started out, I didn't know. Like, okay, if the character is in this situation, what is the choice they're going to make? And I would be like, Now I'm like,
of course he's going to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Of course. Yeah, of course.
So I also want to ask you about the Shadowhunters book, because there's probably like a lot of people watching this video that love this series. Like many of us, we have like grown up reading these books, and if I count it right, there are like 17 books.
I think 17.
17, and the short stories. So when you first came up with the idea for Shadowhunters, did you think that this was going to be like such a long series? It was something that you thought to yourself, could I do this? Like, it was an objective, or it was just something that happened along the way?
It wasn't an objective, just because all I was thinking about was selling and publishing that first set of books, the first trilogy. And I just thought, if I can do that, then I'll be happy, right? And I didn't think much beyond that. And so I was in London, and I was promoting City of Ashes. So I was there for a tour, and I was crossing Blackfriars Bridge. And I was alone. It was very misty, as it often is in London, and I had the sudden idea of this girl and this boy. They're on the bridge in Victorian clothing, and there's this army of sort of clockwork monsters coming towards them. And I went back to the hotel, I wrote it down, and I thought, what is this? This is another Shadowhunter story. It was the first time I really realized I could tell lots of stories in this world. There's not just the one story about, Claire and Jason. No, I love them, but there's this other story that I want to do, and maybe there'll be more stories. So I remember calling up my editor and saying, I have an idea for another book. And Shadowhunter's book, and she was like, great, more Jason Clary. And I was like, actually, it's a historical novel set in England in 1878.
Plot twist.
Plot twist. And yes, she very much was like, oh, I don't know. But they were good. They let me do it. And Infernal Devices, are books that I think a lot of people do resonate with.
Yeah.
So, I'm really happy that I got the chance to write them. But that was the moment, I think, when I thought, this isn't just 3 books. This is a big story that spans many characters.
I think that many of us are very happy that we had like that fire.
But what if I didn't go on the bridge, right? No, I would never know.
Yeah, like, no, I don't want to go to London because it's rainy. I wouldn't have all of this universe. It would be really sad, but maybe it was like destiny.
I like to think so. I like to think so.
Very cool. Also, I've heard that you have like a thing that you call the Bible.
Yeah.
The Shadowhunter books. Could you tell us more about that? Because I think that's really fascinating.
So I call it the Bible because on a television show, there's a thing usually called the Story Bible, and it contains basically, because different people write different episodes, it contains like the information that a new writer would need to know to write an episode of the show. So this is pretty different because it's for me and I write all the episodes. But there was some point at which I realized I can't keep all of this in my head. Like I can't remember absolutely every single detail, can I remember every scar everybody has, the fact that Tessa doesn't like chocolate, just the small details that, I think, your mind is so full of so many details about so many characters and you want to keep it straight. So I decided with my wonderful assistant, Emily, that we would create a story Bible. And so it's got section for history, weapons, magic, characters, and the characters would include, things they like, things they don't like. Jace doesn't like bergamot or cucumbers, and this is just a joke in the book. So it's not a thing that like normally I would remember. So these things are important to write down, and it contains, all the different characters, they're different. Oh, and relationships, like what the different relationships between different people, how they feel about each other. And, also there's a whole section called unanswered questions, like things that are brought up in the story but haven't been answered yet.
What was that?
Yeah, exactly.
What was
like,
that
what was that?
Maybe
what was that?
About this.
Yeah.
That would be really cool. Have you ever been in a book event and a reader has remembered something and thought about that and you were like, yeah, sure, what are you talking about? I don't remember about that.
I was at an event and a girl asked me, how did Jace chip his tooth? And I said, he chipped his tooth?
Wow.
I didn't remember.
You can pick
that was like when I decided I'm going to need a Bible because I'm not going to remember all of this.
Yeah, the fun thing is like you can pick your own story. Like,
I know. I was like,
he
was rescuing a squirrel.
No, not a duck.
Yeah, exactly.
Could
be anything. Could be anything.
That's so fun. And another thing that I think that's really interesting about you as an author is your friendship group, like having friends that are also a writer, like it's something that we see a lot in your life, like doing like PT group and also like the writing, like retirements to write. And I wanted to ask you if you think that having like authors in your life that are your friends and you can talk about, that little thoughts in your head saying blah blah blah, you can do this and stuff, if you think that's something really important that people that want to be writers should like seek and try to have those friends around them.
Yes, I mean, if you're a very solitary person and you don't want to share your thoughts with other people, I understand, but I think for writers we are often in a position where we are forced to be solitary, where we do our work alone. It's not, writing a novel is not like putting on a play or making a movie, or even putting together an album, because most of it is just you alone. And you're working by yourself. And I think for writers that can be very alienating. It can really put you a lot sort of in your head, where you hear that voice that says, this isn't good, you're not doing this right, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's invaluable to have writer friends, at least certainly is for me, who can talk to you about what's going on with your project. So like with my very close group of writer friends who, I'm sure you know a lot of them, Holly Black, Lee Bardugo, Maureen Johnson, Kelly Link, and they're all people who are really familiar with my books, and I'm really familiar with their books. So like if I'm talking to Holly, we have an exchange, I say, oh, I'm really stuck on this thing with Kid and Ty. She'll say, oh, well, I think that Ty would probably do this in this situation. What do you think? She's really prompting me to come up with it, but she's so familiar that it helps. Or if I'm talking to her, I'll say, oh, I don't know. I mean, I think the problem you're having is that, in this situation, Oak wouldn't say that or this, so it's really helpful to be so familiar with each other's worlds. And also it's just, I think, important to have somebody to bounce ideas off of, and I think, like I will say, I think all of you should be very grateful to my group of writers, because when I was working on City of Heavenly Fire, the last of the Mortal Instruments, I was going to kill Simon.
Yeah.
And I was like, yep, that's what's going to happen. And they had an intervention. They sat me down and they were like, no, you can't do this. It's not a good idea. They went around, they explained why. And they're not against killing characters, so I know I can trust them. Like if I said, oh, this character has to die, and they agreed, they would be like, yep, absolutely. But in this case, they were like, no, you don't want to kill Simon. You don't. This is not the right thing. And they convinced me. And then later I was like, oh my God, yes, they were right. What was I thinking?
So there's two things that the Shadowhunters fans we need to think, and one is the Blackfriars Bridge, and your friends writers.
They saved Simon.
Oh my God, thank God. The question is about your documentation process, because you said that you were a journalist, and do you think that this has helped you to document your books, because they are set in many different settings all around the world, different time eras?
I think all writing is good practice, technical writing, nonfiction writing, journalism, and I think I think the thing it helped me with the most is to write to a deadline, yeah, exactly. To know that what it means to have a book or a work that's due at a particular time, and how you have to, use your time leading up to that. And so that's really helpful, but also with research, it's definitely very helpful with research, and it taught me to really love research. So I think that was really helpful with the Infernal Devices, because I had to sort of prove that to my publisher, I can do the research, because there's a lot of work that goes into writing historical fiction. You need to know a lot about the time period. So, I think having had that journalistic experience really did help.
Yeah, and how did you balance this curiosity to keep on reading and keep on documenting and finding that place of, okay, that's enough. This is not necessary. I'm just reading this because I enjoy this subject.
Yeah, I think there's that moment where you have to stop writing everything down into notebooks and actually write the story, because it's trying to build a maze for a mouse. Eventually you have to put the mouse in the maze. Yeah. You have to see if it can run through the maze or if the maze doesn't work. And you're never going to know unless you actually start. So usually I'll set myself a period of time and say, okay, 3 months or 5 months or this much time to do the research, and then I start writing the book. So because it has to be like that, it has to be arbitrary, otherwise you're always going to tell yourself, I could do a little more research, I could read one more book.
My not last but last question about writing is if there's any advice that you would like to give to young writers, or that baby writers that are starting writing and they're having a lot of doubts, and the kind of advice you would have liked to have when you started?
I guess I would say that the doubts that you have when you're writing your first book, the little voice that says this isn't good, or this isn't working, or there's something wrong with this book, you're always going to have that. It doesn't go away, even if you've written 17 books, 25 books, any amount of books. I have friends who've won massive literary prizes and written 30 best-selling books, and they still have that. So I think what you have to do is make friends with that voice, You make peace with it. You know, you say, okay, you know, your job is to make sure that I don't get complacent, that I don't, you know, stop challenging myself and stop, you know, trying to make my work the best it can be. But all these stuff that you're saying about, you know, I'm a bad writer, this book is never going to work, this book is horribly broken, that's all nonsense, because all, you know, half of writing is the editing that you're going to do later. So none of that's even relevant to your first draft. So I would say that voice doesn't leave. You make friends with that voice. You ignore the things that it says that don't matter.
Oh my God, thank you so much. Because I've been thinking while I was listening to you that it would be like really funny to see like the inside out of a writer, like
yeah,
how does that work, is anxiety, like pressing the button all the time.
All the little thought bubbles going around. I mean, one of my friends came to me right before I left for Spain, and she said, just handed in the first draft of her new book, and she said, I just think this one, it's just really bad, it's terrible. And I said, you've said that about every single book.
It's exhausting, actually.
I know.
It's exhausting.
It's always the same.
And you see it so clearly in your writer friends, like, come on, you're very talented, what are you talking about?
But you can't see it in yourself, which I think is why writer friends are really helpful, and also why it's good to remember this always happens. This voice, you know, always says the same thing. It's always going to.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
And my last question is, because I think that probably they're going to know what are you working on, that what is next. And
oh my goodness, so many things. So I'm working right now on the first book in the Wicked Powers, which is the last Shadowhunter trilogy, and the book is called The Last King of Fairy. So I'm very much like in that right now. I'm also polishing up the stories for my Kickstarter that I did, so I'm, you know, finishing up that project. And then I also just sold a new YA fantasy series called In Fire Foretold, which is a sort of, it's almost a mashup of like Swordcatcher and Shadowhunters, because it takes place partly in our world and partly in a high fantasy world. So I'm excited about getting to write that. And yes, I'm very busy.
and we're really looking forward to reading all of those books. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing all your knowledge and experience. And that was all. Thank you for watching.
Thank you. Bye.
Done.